So it's only been filming for a month and production has already been halted due to the COVID-19 crisis, and it's not set to come out to theaters until sometime next year. But today, we are going to talk about The Batman. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is your first time watching the Armchair Auteur. My name is Dominic Griffith, I'm a film critic. This is a YouTube project I've been doing for about a year where we talk about movies every week and pop culture and film industry trends and things of that nature. Now, I, like many of you, have been under self-quarantine during this whole COVID-19 thing, and I've been using most of my time to catch up on movies I haven't seen recently, and also to catch up on reading a lot of comics. So lately, I've been thinking about Batman a lot more than normal. If you're not new to the channel, you're aware that I love Batman. I did an entire video about the history of actors who played Batman before. I'm a diehard Batman nerd. Recently, I've just been thinking a lot about the character, about the franchise, about its place in popular culture. Last week, I caught up on a lot of old Batman comics I meant to read and have not been reading, so I finally finished Tom King's 85-issue Batman run, which is a ride. I also read Brian Michael Bendis and Nick Darrington's Batman Universe comic, which is really cool. You should check that out. I even sat through the first issue of Frank Miller's new Dark Knight sequel. It's very strange, but Rafael Grampa's art is incredible. Anyway, all that to say, I've just been like in a Bat zone. I mean, you know, I saw Birds of Prey last month and really loved it. And a big part of that is actually because of Matt Reeves' new film, The Batman, coming out next year. So a few weeks ago, I thought about doing a video about the Batman, and I was like, you know, this movie just started filming. We have like a teaser, and we have like some set pictures, and that's it. Like, we have castings. It would be really weird and pointless, I think, to make a video about a film that isn't even done being made, one that we know so little about. And a lot of that was just because of some of the weird discourse I saw cropping up about the film based solely on that teaser and those photos. I just kind of decided, you know what, I've been very busy, I don't have time to do this anyway, whatever. I'm just gonna like shoot off a couple of angry tweets and keep it moving. But now I'm trapped inside my apartment, and I've been thinking about this movie more and more for literally no reason. And now that production's halted on it, it looks like it's gonna be moved even further away. That should make it out of my mind, but instead it's still very firmly in my and like my vision. So the crux to me about why there's like this weird discourse around the film already is based around one of the core set leaks, and that is the bat symbol in the new movie. The image that you can sort of see in the teaser and then in this photo right here, it highlights this new design choice for what Robert Pattinson's Batman is going to look like in the new film. And as you can see, it is a bat symbol made out of a gun, made out of pieces of a gun. When I saw it, I thought, oh, that's awesome. That's like amazing. It's hilarious. Because to me, that is such a like on the nose thing to put in a Batman movie. Like, oh look, Bruce Wayne took the gun that killed his parents and made it into a bat symbol and wears that every night, like to scare junkies, I guess. It's crazy. It's insane, you know? And to me, I thought that meant that Matt Reeves was going to be going into this movie with something that I feel like Christopher Nolan never quite fully had, which is sort of like a love for the absurdity of Batman. I think that the idea of Batman as a character is such an elastic concept. It's something that everyone always thinks of as being like gritty and dark and grim and stuff, but in the 100 years the character's been published in comics and TV, animated series, video games, there have been so many different versions of the character, and they're all valid, most of them, and they're all, for the most part, like different. There's, you know, goofier Batman, darker Batman, more, you know, meta takes on the character, more like gritty, whatever. And I feel like as much as people love the Christopher Nolan Batman films, those films are a little bit too entrenched in realism. Like, they're very good for what they are, but for what I currently really connect to with the character, they feel kind of rigid to me. So when I saw these set photos, I was like, oh yeah, that's like gritty and dark, but it's also it's hilarious. It's just like extra as fuck that like Batman would have that. Allegedly, it's loosely based on like a short that Kevin Smith wrote where Batman like melts the gun down into the bat insignia and stuff. He seemed really stoked that that seems to be where the inspiration comes from. And that's how I took it. But other people seem to look at it from a different perspective as proof that this is going to be another Nolan-esque, gritty, realistic, serious Batman movie. And, I mean, we don't know for sure, obviously, right? There's no way to know where the film is going to go until, you know, much later in the production process. But we can wildly speculate. Christopher Nolan was not a filmmaker who had, like, a real deep affinity for Batman beyond the iconography of Batman. He wasn't someone who like read the comics obsessively and knows all the lore and stuff. A lot of the influences that ended up in the Dark Knight film trilogy come from David Goyer's recommendations, and primarily it seemed like Christopher Nolan was pulling in Batman Begins from the Denny O'Neil years at the 70s Ra's al Ghul stuff. And then in The Dark Knight, it was loosely pulling from Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's work on The Long Halloween and Dark Victory. And then for The Dark Knight Rises, it's very clear that he was sort of pulling from the Bane stuff in the 90s, but like largely from the No Man's Land era, when like Greg Rucka and other guys were writing the books at the time. And also Denny O'Neil still, I guess. The guy was around a lot. And from what we can tell from interviews with Matt Reeves, he has said that his approach to the character is going to be much more detective-based. He wants it to be more of a mystery. We're going to see the detective elements of Batman on screen fully for the first time, which I am very pro. He seems to have been influenced by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's work on The Long Halloween and Dark Victory, in the sense that he wants to have a bunch of different villain characters in the movie and not just focusing on one. Like, those are books where every major member of the Rogues Gallery is represented, even though there's a main story in the front, they're kind of all in the background, so that's kind of cool. It seems to be inspired by some of the Year 2 stuff. I'm wondering if the gun symbolism in the thing is going to be related to the fact that in Batman Year 2, Batman like used a gun and then ended up not using a gun, and all the Joe Chill stuff, like maybe that'll get explored, who knows. If we really want to look at the direction that Matt Reeves is most likely going to take with this material, all we really have to do is look at his past. Matt Reeves' first two films, Cloverfield and Let Me In, are both, semi-realistic films that are genre films, but they're done from like a more, realistic lens, I suppose. Cloverfield's like a big kaiju movie, but it's told on the ground with handheld camera and shaky cam and stuff. Very like personal documentary style, right? And then Let Me In, this remake of a Swedish vampire film from Thomas Alfredson, is also, vampires are like a genre, and it's kind of taken from like a moodier prestige lens, right? In some ways, Matt Reeves seems sort of like the opposite of his often collaborator, J.J. Abrams. Like, they both seem to come from a lot of similar inspirations and influences, but J.J. seems to really grasp onto like the big nostalgia spectacle element of genre fiction, and then Matt Reeves seems to be drawn to taking those things that he loved as a child and then approaching them like a grown-up. A lot of filmmakers do this. This has become like a really big trend in mainstream blockbusters, taking concepts and IP and ideas that are usually kind of goofy and ridiculous and then presenting them to the public like they're Oscar bait, you know what I mean? Like giving it that sort of like serious prestige feel and vibe and tone. And if we're going to talk about Matt Reeves, and we're going to talk about that means we have to talk about the Planet of the Apes. Now, some of you may remember this recent trilogy of Planet of the Apes reboot films and know that Matt Reeves only made 2 of these 3 films. The first one, The Rise of the Planet of the Apes, is directed by Rupert Wyatt. This is the one with James Franco, and it sets up a modern, retelling of the Planet of the Apes lore, sort of. Rather than taking place in the future where humans are enslaved by apes, it shows the origin of how all this came to be. And Rise of the Planet of the Apes is a pretty good movie, pretty solid. It's got some cool stuff in it. Andy Serkis, very heavily involved with his like mocap team and doing all sorts of brand new things with bringing apes to life. But it's really the Matt Reeves films, the 2 follow-up ones, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and War for the Planet of the Apes, that most people like the most. These 2 films are sort of like a 2-part remake of 1973's Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which tells the story of how the founder of Ape Society, Caesar, had to go to war with humans and then ended up like connecting them back together and stuff. It's sort of like a more hopeful version of the prologue of that entire world. There are a lot of Planet of the Apes movies and they're all very complicated. That said, when you watch Reeves films, it's obvious that they're like good movies, right? I'm not here to argue that. Like, they're entertaining, they're well made, they're well shot, they have really strong sequences, the acting's all pretty good, especially from all the people doing the mocap work for the apes. Serkis himself, Toby Kebbell, even Steve Zahn in War for the Planet of the Apes. It's like good work. It's like really cool movies. It's cool that you took this like big kind of goofy sci-fi concept from the 70s and brought it to present day and made it interesting and palatable for like where blockbuster cinema is at currently. But I sort of feel like the approach used in these movies has its issues. My biggest issue with these newer, more realistic blockbuster films, just this trend, I guess this sort of started like the Bourne Supremacy and like onward, is I am fine with movies, action films, like genre films, science fiction films, superhero films, like all these things that typically get trotted out in like a more exploitation tone or whatever. I'm totally cool with watching them from a more realistic perspective. I'm totally cool watching films like this and seeing them be treated like, serious cinema. I don't have a problem with that, like, on its own. My issue is that oftentimes, outside of like the real big outliers, like the Nolan Bat films and stuff, some of these films always seem like they just have an exterior layer of gravitas painted over them. And then when you watch them, that layer gets chipped away by the actual content and themes of the film. What I mean by that is that these movies, by and large, are still huge, expensive films made by studios to promote brands and to keep IP alive and to sell merchandise and lunchboxes and all the same stuff they're always made to make. But when you make one and you make it real serious and realistic and stuff, you have this tendency to rely on like the formalism of prestige films and what that codifies, like what that makes people feel when they're watching. But if you think about it for even like half a second longer as you're watching it, it just feels like less of a movie. What I mean by that is like Chris Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, fantastic films all across the board, love them to death, blah, blah, blah. I revisited them recently. And I still really enjoy them from a craft perspective, from just their fun perspective. I like Batman, I like Christian Bale, Heath Ledger Joker's great, all that stuff. But like, when you watch them, you can't help but see how like just weirdly fascist they are. And just how many strange like post 9/11 impulses are just like gripping this movie like tightly, and it kind of just makes them less fun. You know what I mean? It's just very clear that like this approach and this style of filmmaking for something that is essentially a children's superhero character, it can work, but that most of the time, focusing something like that through this lens leads to just weird, sometimes unintentional, like political commentary, and I just don't like it. I don't want to sound like a child and say that I want every superhero movie to be like a Marvel movie where it's all just like everyone's chatting and they all talk like Joss Whedon and everything's colorful or whatever. I don't mean that. I just mean that it's weird watching a movie that has such an inherently ridiculous premise be treated so sincerely. In the Apes films, for instance, we watch this huge epic tale between like ape and human, oppressor and oppressed, and revolution and war and survival. And, that's cool. I'm into that. I like, stories about revolutions and, like all that stuff. But at its core, these are movies that have talking apes on horseback firing automatic weapons. And that's really cool, and it's great to see, and it's insane, and I can't believe these movies even have these things in them. But then because they're not really like full-on real cinema, like Martin Scorsese would say, they can't really further explore a lot of the themes that they set up. So they set up this thing where, in many different ways, the apes become like an allegory for every oppressed group in like world history, you know what I mean? Many of those oppressed groups, minorities, and then humans sort of feel like a stand-in for just like white people, I suppose. And you watch them struggle, but then both films go out of their way to make this weird false equivalency between the oppressor and the oppressed. And when you watch both films, you constantly see this sense of like, look at all the good humans, don't be mad at the bad humans. And it just seems like such a reductive and like silly thing to do in a movie like this, until you remember that it's like a summer blockbuster movie designed to like sell toys and shit. You know what I mean? Like, when you think about that, then yeah, of course it's a movie about like human togetherness and like hugging, but it's presented to you like this serious Oscar bait movie that's about real themes and issues, and like it's only sort of more real than the 1973 film. That film's kind of cheesy and kind of corny, but they both espouse a lot of the same ideas in the end. It just seems to me like sometimes people approach this material and want to make it more palatable. They want to make it something that like critics will like. Filmmakers want to be able to make these big budget movies, but they still want people to take them seriously. And that's fine. I don't have any problem with that necessarily. It's just odd. Now, I know what you're thinking. If I'm complaining about Marvel movies on my channel all the time and how I think they're like disposable and like kind of goofy and samey, and here I am now complaining about the Nolan Bat films and complaining about these Planet of the Apes movies and stuff, like, what is it I actually want? Well, I think there's a healthy middle ground. I do think that more often than not, if you're engaging pulpier, comic-based, or old sci-fi based material, if you engage with it on the level of the source material and you don't try so hard to make it like for real for people, you can still come to interesting conclusions and have things to say and explore interesting themes. You just don't have to like force it or look like such a try-hard, I guess is my point. So when I think about the Nolan Bat films, I mean, I think he was being pretty sincere in a lot of that stuff, which is kind of what makes some of the fashy stuff so disconcerting. And I look at Matt Reeves' approach to the Apes movies, I think, man, imagine if you just had slightly more fun. And imagine if you were more honest with what the material is like. Maybe it wouldn't be so jarring when you have such a challenging setup and premise that still comes down to a lowest common denominator solution. I do think, in some ways, there is a middle ground. And when I pose what I think the middle ground is like, I'm going to sound like an asshole, but when I think about something that is semi-realistic and kind of deals in the real world and, kind of prestige-y, but also inherently ridiculous, over the top, very much born of the world of comics, and comes to weird, interesting conclusions and doesn't seem like just such a neat and tidy experience, well, I think about Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. I think about Zack Snyder's work on the DC Extended Universe, and I think about how this dude made this huge, weird monstrosity for hundreds of millions of dollars, where he essentially shows up and acts out his fantasy of having made Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns and explores a bunch of weird opinions about, like, God and humanity and stuff. And that movie is weird, okay? A lot of things about it don't work. But I find it so much more interesting and compelling and fascinating and just something I want to engage with than many other superhero films of the last, 10, 15 years. It's unique. And at no point do I really feel like that's a movie that's, aiming for the sky and then, brings everything back down to, the usual bullshit you're used to. It aims for the sky and, misses, hard, and then does a bunch of weird stuff. And then the Justice League movie he made to follow it up, he didn't even get to finish. And, that's bad, but his take on Batman is so underrated to me. And watching it, it's a serious take, like the idea of, a mid-40s alcoholic Bruce Wayne that just wants to die and has, failed his own mission, kind of having to be reawoken, sort of, having to be, inspired by meeting Superman and Superman sacrificing himself and becoming, a better person, a better hero, and a better leader. It's a really cool arc. And Affleck does incredible work as the actor, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of grim. It's definitely very moody and artsy and weird, all the dream sequences and stuff. But when you see Batman, he's still a hulking mass of it's not realistic at all. It's the idea and the feel of comics Batman on the big screen. And no, it's not realistic that Ben Affleck would look like that and be able to move around at that speed with that much rubber musculature grafted onto his bodice. But it looks cool and it feels right, and it just kind of gets what I like about Batman. I like that Batman is not just this one gritty thing, just this I hate every time someone tries to have the argument about well, Batman's a billionaire and why does he just give to charity and why does he fight criminal? I don't need so many of the real world arguments grafted onto this character. I'm totally fine with him just being this character and telling fun stories with him. And you can tell so many different kinds of stories with him. It's such an elastic premise that it's a little bit bothersome to me when people keep coming to the same boring, gritty, realistic conclusion. And I'm fine exploring those ideas in more of a metascape. If you want something that explores a lot of the real world questions about what Batman would be like in the real world, but isn't pompous and kind of, repetitive, I would check out Warren Ellis and Brian Hitch's new comic, The Batman's Grave, which, breaks the fourth wall and pokes holes in a lot of these concepts and ideas, but in a way that's still entertaining and sort of true to the, Batman ethos. The way I see it, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy is iconic. It's some of the most celebrated, successful, critically acclaimed films of the era, and they have dominated the popular culture for so long that, to me, it seems depressing to think about getting a new Batman movie with a new actor and a new cast, a new creative team, and all this stuff, and then still winding up exploring the same territory. So it is my hope that Matt Reeves' take on the Batman character has more, metaphorically speaking, apes on horseback firing automatic weapons than it does this shit. Because Zack Snyder's take flamed out. It didn't work. And he tried really hard to do something interesting, and he didn't quite nail it. And as a result, we're sweeping it away. And if we're just going to go right back to that Nolan endpoint, we may as well just not do it at all. If we're going to be able to make a new Batman movie, and we can do whatever we want with it, we should have fun. It should be like an interesting, new feeling approach to the character. And God willing, that's what I really hope Matt Reeves' The Batman's going to be. Well, thank you guys for listening to me rant about a bunch of theoretical Batman shenanigans. I appreciate it. Definitely check out the Batman comics I recommended earlier in the video. I'll put them in the description below as well. Some really good reading if you're going to be stuck at home anyway. If you do need to find a Batman thing to rewatch, I would suggest skipping the Nolan trilogy. You've probably revisited more than enough times. But give Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, the theatrical cut, my preference, another shot. I honestly feel like it's better than a lot of you people think. Thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit subscribe. You get the little bell icon to get notifications when I drop new videos. I'm going to be stuck in the apartment for the foreseeable future anyway. I'm going to have new videos out next week too. If you guys have anything you want me to see or want to hear me talk about, you can tell me in the comments below. Yeah, so thanks for supporting, and have a great day. Stay safe out there, guys. Bye.